It's that time again. Another year has come and gone. God, it feels like 2024 has barely started and now it's over. But a lot has happened. I got a few things done and I lost quite a bit of weight, which is good, since now I don't need to feel bad about being a gamer and spending a huge amount of time in front of a TV screen. And the past year left us with so many great gaming memories, as well as some controversies which I won't focus on in this video. And of course, it left us a bunch of games still to complete. In the past I've made top 10 lists, more loose showcases and even complete breakdowns of the whole year, mentioning all major events and releases, or at least those that interested me personally. This year I want to do something in between. So I'm going to celebrate another great gaming year by highlighting my personal favorites from each month. But since this isn't the most fair approach, given that some months had a lot more notable releases than others, I will also give out some highly sought after UnicornStorm gaming awards in a few different categories. Yeah, I'm surely not the only one caring about those. And it should go without saying, but there will of course be games some of you expect that won't appear anywhere in this video, simply because I either didn't find the time to play them or frankly wasn't that interested in them. Doesn't mean they are bad, just that I haven't really looked at them. So no Stalker 2, no Shin Megami Tensei, no Helldivers 2 and no Dragon Age Veilguard, among many others. Yeah, let's just stop wasting time and start looking at the gaming year of 2024. January. The year started for me with a nice surprise. Ever since I got the Game Boy version of the original Prince of Persia in the early 90s, I've been somewhat of a fan of the franchise. I at least tried nearly all the games and I am, like many others, especially fond of Sands of Time, which presented the prince with his now iconic acrobatic abilities. The franchise dipped its toes into many different gameplay styles, so it was only a matter of time and also an obvious choice to try its hand on the Metroidvania genre. And it succeeded with flying colors. After a somewhat awkward start, the game convinces with a compelling game world, a versatile moveset and an awesome combat system. You're gonna slice and dice through enemies with a bunch of different combos and special attacks before you're off again swinging and tumbling through deadly traps. It's a lot of fun exploring this mysterious place and uncovering all its secrets. Fighting the many different enemies is exciting and flashy, and the bosses demand a full grasp of the mechanics and all your concentration. And the more you progress through the story, the more compelling and intriguing it gets. I really had a blast with it. It's a great game and a worthy addition to this long-running franchise. February. Come on, there wasn't even a competition this month. The most notable releases were remakes, actual remakes, and while there have been some smaller games that were quite fun, it was clear from the beginning that the second part of the Final Fantasy VII reimagining would be the winner this month. And I'm calling it a reimagining deliberately, because it is in no way a remake. It strays way too far from the original, and now we know that the designation of the first part was just a misleading naming convention for the whole trilogy. Deliberately misleading, I dare to wager. And as a reimagining, now even after the second part, I still think it doesn't hold a candle to the original. A lot of changes and additions miss the point the original successfully made. We get pointless spectacle where there was introspection before, and instead of a well-paced journey, we get endlessly bloated dungeons. And it's a fun ride all the way through. The combat system got overhauled and now plays actually well and offers you so many different approaches to any encounter. Every character feels unique, not just with the basic moves, but also their unlockable special maneuvers and team-up attacks, both regular and ultimate. The world is vast and detailed, not really efficiently used, but nice to look at as you run past ruins, industrial facilities, or the more whimsical landmarks. There's lots to do in each area, and overall the world is brimming with life and personality, and so are its inhabitants. Pointless changes and goofy inconsistencies for comedic effect aside, both the NPCs as well as the party members are complex and multifaceted characters that are a joy to watch and interact with during many compelling and of course hilarious scenes. While there is a lot in the game I would have preferred to be different, I cannot deny how much the devs achieved with this one, how much I am enjoying my time with this game. It may not surpass its predecessor, but it does stand strong on its own 2 feet and is well worth playing, both by newcomers and old fans. March. This month made the decision really hard. A lot of games got released that I was eagerly awaiting. Some were a letdown, not saying they were outright bad, but they just disappointed me in one or another regard. Like the Alone in the Dark remake that has such great atmosphere but was just so pretentious and also janky. Or Dragon's Dogma 2, which was for all intents and purposes more like another module for the original Dragon's Dogma, which I guess is fine for everyone who already enjoyed the original game. And I mean, there's a lot to enjoy about this game. But then there was the fun and quirky platformer Princess Peach Showtime, with so many unique level ideas. Or Rise of the Ronin, which put the Souls-like combat we came to know from Team Ninja into a somewhat historically inspired open world of Japan at the dawn of the Meiji era. But the game that positively surprised and intrigued me the most this month was Unicorn Overlord. An anime war story, a medieval tactics RPG, an auto-battler. Now, I'm ignorant when it comes to those, and to be honest, I pretty much outright dismissed all previous auto-battlers. I mean, why would I want to play a game that plays itself? But now I have seen the light. It actually has a lot of depth and offers a great deal of decision making. And it gets damn exhilarating. It's a gritty fantasy story that takes its audience seriously, like in the good old days of anime. This game has more in common with early Fire Emblem than with modern Fire Emblem. No tropey beating around the bush and hiding information from the player. Instead we get an actual war of information, actual deception, presented in a mature style. And speaking of style, the amazing art design iconic for Vanillaware games really makes this game a joy to behold, whether you're watching cutscenes or fighting battles. Combat is intense with highly customizable troops and loadouts. You really need to think about your squad composition because every unit brings so many factors into your overall strategy, and since you can't affect the flow of battle once it has started, your preparations need to be airtight. Whether you're following the main events of the quite intriguing story or solve conflicts off the beaten path to expand your sphere of influence and gain allies and resources, every little detail, system and mechanic in this game neatly slots into one another to create this highly immersive and exciting game. April. While the last month had me weighing up between too many choices, this month on the other hand left no room for doubt. Stellar Blade just steamrolled the competition for me. Not that there haven't been some really good games besides this. The game got some initial boost from going against some trends in modern Western game design, mostly by embracing the sexy heroine, and a lot of people, especially those commenting on games on social media, seemingly only got interested in the game because it wasn't woke, similar to another game that got released a bit later. But very quickly the game proved that it was more than just a waifu ogling simulator. The combat is an exhilarating spectacle, looking like a Platinum game, but requiring more awareness and patience because of its punishing nature, making it more similar to Souls-likes. But because of its flashy nature, among some other design decisions, it more so resembles Sekiro than Dark Souls. Levels are huge and complicated, full of shortcuts and somewhat hidden areas containing all kinds of collectibles. They are beautifully designed and sport some good variety. Also, there are two different giant wastelands, but even those manage to look different from each other. To make exploring these detailed and appealing environments even more enjoyable, you get to listen to amazing and striking background music, with many of the tracks having been composed by the studio behind the Nier and Nier Automata soundtrack. And yeah, you definitely hear the influence. You also see it in the story, though that one isn't Stellar Blade's greatest strength. Nah, you're here for the core gameplay loop, and that one is pretty amazing, with a robust, parry-focused combat system and a growing arsenal of tools and special abilities, where you fight disgusting monstrosities in bloody, brutal battles. And yeah, the sexy lead in all her sometimes more and sometimes less ridiculous outfits contributes to the enjoyment of the game. So the gameplay is Sekiro light. The music and somewhat story is Nier Automata light. And the visuals are Battle Angel Alita light. But the sum of all these parts is greater, makes it a really fun experience. And now there's even an official Nier Automata DLC for the game. So what else could you guys want? May. A lot of gamers celebrated the release of Hellblade 2 after years of waiting and delays. Not me though, I never got around playing the first game, and while what I've seen from both games looks quite intriguing, well, I won't start with the sequel. Instead, another stellar looking game caught my interest. Nine Souls is a Metroid-like action game with Souls-inspired combat mechanics in this hand-drawn art style. The story combines grim lore with cutesy characters in, at times, endearing little moments. Your hero is this cat person, and many of the NPCs you meet are animal people as well, while the world has this sci-fi orientalism going on. Gameplay-wise, it's what you'd expect from a Metroid-like. A good number of diverse environments, huge complicated areas that, depending on their setting, might focus more on platforming, fighting or puzzle solving, where you frequently encounter obstacles and dead ends that require the use of special abilities to progress past them. The weighty, punishing combat and the limited access to healing items makes the exploration feel more dangerous, even without overwhelming challenges, so the Souls-like combat and, let's call them surviving mechanics, are a perfect fit for the Metroid-like progression. A really engaging experience both because of the gorgeous art style and the methodic and punishing nature of the encounters. June. June gave me a bit of a breather. There wasn't anything this month I've been eagerly awaiting, but they still released a few rather interesting games, with Nightmare Karts being an especially pleasant surprise. I mean, it's a damn blood-borne PS1 kart racer, and it plays rather well for what it is. But fun as this one was, there was another game that caught my attention, and even though it wasn't really any more mechanically complex or more expensive or anything, it kept me rather intrigued. I'm talking about Still Wakes the Deep, a cosmic horror story on an oil rig, where you have to navigate through the more and more deteriorating facility and hide from gruesome monsters. Which makes it sound grander than it is. The game is incredibly linear and there's not really any decision making going on. When it comes down to it, the game doesn't offer more gameplay depth than early Wii games. You just walk down hallways and have a little button prompt QTE or a shallow wiggle mechanic. Navigating the areas is more following the obvious path than anything else, and avoiding enemies is less stealth and more calling time out whenever you're near a little crawly spot. And avoiding line of sight is so unreliable that it mostly comes down to throwing one of the many pieces of garbage these arena floors are littered with. But presentation is king, especially with this game. Yeah, the gameplay is shallow, but the atmosphere is top notch. This oil rig is the perfect backdrop for a game like this, and it looks amazing with so much detail. Ropes, chains, cables or tarps fight against the howling wind, freezing breath escapes your lungs, the sea raging below you. The darkness has the massive steel structure appear even more impressive. And just look at the monsters and all the goop slowly swallowing up the whole facility. That's some good body horror reminiscent of The Thing. And kinda like The Thing, the game is all about its characters, the colorful crew manning this oil rig. And they're also very captivating and interesting people. There's some real chemistry going on between them, certainly helped by the rather well done voice acting, with some bonus points for this game taking place in Scotland, so we are treated to this charming Scottish accent and slang.
I'd like to see you try and do my job. You wouldn't know a spark plug from a fucking hairdryer.
July. Yeah, this month made it easy for me. I was looking forward to Fallout London and the game didn't disappoint. There were some other games that interested me this month, namely Conscript and Nobody Wants to Die, but to be honest, I haven't found the time to really dive into them. Also, Fallout London is really good. It's a free mod for Fallout 4, a huge mod for Fallout 4, with a file size rivaling the base game, which only makes sense given that the team pretty much changed every texture, weapon and apparel skin, all kinds of interactable objects as well as HUD and menu graphics. They created a huge game world with lots of interior levels, giving stage to an elaborate story with hours of fully voiced NPC dialogue, as well as new radio hosts with their own selection of music. And then there's all the new enemy types. There is just so much stuff in this game, but more than that, it's of such high quality, barring some bugs and glitches due to the base game itself as well as hiccups from it being an indie game. And we have to keep in mind that this is an indie game, a free indie game. The quality on display in this game puts many high-profile and AAA games to shame. And not just when it comes to care and attention, but also in terms of creativity. You will discover fun and creative little dungeons, side quests, or just single scenes and conversations, and all of them embrace the very British theme. Collect beer coasters in pubs, stuff yourself with fine English cuisine, and cuddle the best good boy Churchill. And since this takes place in England, there's a much larger focus on melee combat than shooting, where you have to skillfully parry your opponent's attacks and wait for an opening, as to not get parried yourself. And the melee weapon selection is nothing to scoff at. The game is also quite difficult, not super hard, it's not the Dark Souls or Fallout games, but with the focus on melee combat, and with how many encounters are designed, with how easy and often you get irradiated, you're going to lose tons of health, and stim packs aren't that plentiful. Instead, you have to rely on your cooking, finally a real use for the system. In fact, all the different crafting methods are a lot more appealing and useful, at least to me. So scavenging became a bit more deliberate, since I didn't just pick up ammo and stim packs, but also specific ingredients for certain recipes. But none of that would be that engaging if the exploration weren't that fun. This virtual London is an amazing game world, open-ended but not as open as Bethesda's Fallout. You can't just walk anywhere, there are many organic obstacles and roadblocks inside the city, sometimes actual roadblocks. But more often collapsed buildings or the highly irradiated water of the Thames, or the flooded streets. So traversing the streets of London becomes very deliberate. You're not following wherever the wind leads you, you're actually trying to navigate the labyrinth that is the post-nuclear apocalypse London. And it's the most fun I had with Fallout in a long while. August. 2 games I highly anticipated released this month, though one of them only in digital format, which almost disqualified it for me, it being a full price release and all. Well, it did release in physical form near the end of my deadline in December, so I did consider it for this list. That said, Black Myth Wukong didn't captivate me as much as I had expected. It's fine, but it just doesn't draw me in that much. Visions of Mana, on the other hand, was a blast. A light-hearted, fast-paced, party-based action RPG in huge and colorful environments. The game continues where Trials of Mana left off. The areas got bigger, or well, at least wider, and combat received a few changes once again, which kinda happens with all the Mana games, which only makes sense since every one of those has different systems when it comes to class, level progression and character customization. Trials of Mana had a large roster of characters with somewhat fixed classes and ability pools. Fights focused on simple yet fast combos and the accumulation of technique points to use character-specific special attacks. Visions of Mana goes back to the approach seen in Secret of Mana, where you had access to a large amount of different weapons that all handled differently and could all be leveled individually to learn weapon-specific charge-up attacks. Well, this game is kinda in the middle between the other two. Instead of a selection of unique weapons, every character can now attune to one of 8 elements, or none at all, which grants them access to certain abilities and a fighting style, though those are shared between multiple classes. So it's more like every character has about 3 unique fighting styles with an ultimate attack and a pool of active and passive abilities tied to any class. This results in a huge amount of available tactics and of course lots and lots of customization and player expression. And lots of fun wailing on all kinds of cutesy critters. The fighting feels a bit more stiff than in the last Mana game, certainly a deliberate decision, which makes fights a tiny bit, more difficult and less mindless than in the Trials of Mana remake. Instead of scenic and highly detailed hallways in between towns and dungeons, we now get huge open areas that don't really offer more substance to the gameplay, but certainly look nice, and at least they are filled with countless minor collectibles to waste your time while traveling from one location to the next. The story is anime bullshit, well, it's Final Fantasy X again, but the presentation is very much anime bullshit, with forced conflict and artificial mystery. There are also some pretty heartfelt moments and good character interactions to be found. If you're not fond of anime, you won't like this game's story, but if you can endure some modern anime tropes, then this game will certainly offer hours upon hours of entertainment. September. Another month that made it hard for me to decide. Now, a lot of games I was interested this month have been remakes or the likes. Games I have already played in the past and enjoyed them, so I'm happy to see them get more recognition or wider availability. I mean, the second Miles Edgeworth game never left Japan at all, so it's great to now finally get to play it. Legally. But there were 2 games that really blew me away. Both incredibly fun, full of amazing and creative ideas, and it's hard to say which of those 2 I actually like more. Astrobot is just such a cute platformer that plays great, sounds amazing, utilizes references and nostalgia in an actually skillful way, and is just a grand old time through and through. And Echoes of Wisdom drew me in and didn't let me go for entirely different reasons, that mostly come down to this game's approach to the classic top-down Zelda design. This game marries the classic design with the Switch game's open-air design. Instead of highly specific dungeon items you have to use very deliberately to solve handcrafted puzzles, you now get a million tools and use them however you see fit and find your own solutions. The world or level design is still very deliberate though, and while it's possible to cheese parts of the level design, especially later on once you collected the right echoes, you can't fly completely off the rails. My fear before the game released was that you could circumvent any challenge by just summoning 100 bats or something, and that's thankfully not the case. I mean, the bat is still pretty useful, but not as broken as I expected at first. But yeah, the focus on creative solution finding over combat and traditional puzzle solving really intrigued me. I soon settled on a preferred playstyle, though I'm sure everyone has their own selection of echoes they prefer to use, so no 2 playthroughs will look the same. And it's also the perfect setup for challenge runs, which makes this whole game even more exciting. Now, I don't need any more games in this style. I would like to have more games about Zelda herself that emphasize on her being the carrier of the Triforce of Wisdom, but I'm completely satisfied with this one unique experience. An experience I will surely return to at some point, just because it forced me to think outside the box, approach combat in a different way, get really creative with puzzle solutions. and the game really encouraged me to experiment. It's still pretty easy, so I didn't need to leave my comfort zone too much, but when I had to try different approaches or come up with inventive new solutions, it felt really great and satisfying. This game was risky. They could have just given us another classic top-down Zelda. They could have just given us remakes of the Oracle games in this engine. It would have been the easiest thing and easy money for Nintendo. I still want him to do that. But they decided to make such an unconventional Zelda game, and I'm so happy they did. You don't get a game like this every day, so I really appreciate and treasure this one. October. Yeah, I made a 1-hour video about this game. Go watch that one if you want to know why I chose this game for my favorite October release. But for real, this game is just a joy to play. It's the Nightmare Before Christmas game we never got. In this retro-style JRPG, you play as a skeleton witch looking for her dog and stumbling into a sinister conspiracy. It's a light-hearted journey through a macabre world full of dark humor and lots of bad puns and silly jokes. But even though the game isn't all that serious, there are still some really heartfelt moments to be found, and also some pretty badass ones. And when the game wants to create an atmosphere, it goes all out. The whole game is set in this Halloween aesthetic, but don't let that fool you. There's some good variety with the environments to be found. The town of Horrorwell itself, a moody forest, a bayou, a gothic manor, even some sci-fi horror with the destroyed laboratory and a spaceship, among quite a few more settings. Character designs are wacky and draw from all kinds of folklore and pop culture, and you get to recruit up to 30 party members, with the vast majority of them being optional. Yeah, this is a chunky game. It might only have 4 chapters, but those are big, with lots of side content. This isn't your average RPG Maker game. It's a work of passion with so much attention to detail. It's a full-blown adventure that fully commits to its central idea. It's not one of the many Final Fantasy likes. It's not the same old tropey medieval fantasy, though there are a lot of tropes in this game, mostly played for laughs. It's a unique idea, competently executed, and it didn't get the recognition it deserved because the devs got screwed over by Valve. Which is such a shame, because this game was one of my highlights this year. November. After the closure of Studio Alpha Dream, the last thing I would have expected was another game in the Mario and Luigi series. And what's more, having it developed by the studio behind Tenchu and Way of the Samurai. Well, in November I finally got my hands on the game. And it's such a blast. While it does go its own way in some aspects, it's still very much a continuation of the Mario and Luigi franchise, with the weird new characters, silly enemies and the creative ways the brothers work together to overcome obstacles. This series is very dear to me, especially since it kept the Mario RPG format alive after Paper Mario went a different direction. And the games fleshed out both the relationship of the brothers as well as especially Luigi's personality. The guy is just so adorable. All the RPGs did this to some extent, but they went all out with this series. And this game doesn't stop with the trend, it even embraces it fully. It's like this game is focused on Luigi and Mario is just in for the ride. It's Luigi who discovers the new Bros abilities. He comes up with puzzle solutions. He carries the game's sidekick. He has a unique comedic entrance for every level. And just compare the brothers' level up animations.
Oh yeah! It's a cool. Okay.
And speaking of animations, oh man, this game is ADHD in playable form. You see, the Mario and Luigi games were already more hyper than any other of the Mario RPGs. I mean, The one actually called Super Mario RPG had you simply press the action button when you either land or receive a hit. And even though the Paper Mario games, the first two Paper Mario games, were quite creative in what you have to press, or tap, or wiggle when attacking, but it still stayed relatively chill. Not so in the Mario and Luigi games. You're back to only pressing a single button, at least when it comes to standard attacks and defense, but especially during the enemy's turn you have to put in some work. Enemies spinning around you, jumping over you, throwing projectiles at you, and you have to dodge or counter multiple times during a single attack. And the game is balanced around you, doing somewhat well with this. There's no tanking attacks in this one. Regular enemies can wreck your shit if you don't learn their tells and how to counter them. And this game here goes even further. Not necessarily mechanics wise, but in its presentation. Mario doesn't just do a two-tiered jump, nah, he gets freaking catapulted up into the air before he stumps down on that poor little fellow. And Luigi smashes into enemies after getting hammer boosted by his brother. Not even during exploration are you allowed to slow down. Luigi now moves on his own, which makes platforming easier, but it also leads to him moving however he likes and not always going where you want him to go. To compensate, you now can just order him to do stuff for you, collecting coins and glowy thingies, smashing up boxes, picking vegetables. The guy is constantly running all over the place. And stuff is happening constantly. All the little environments feel so alive. Even though it's all just small islands, there's quite a lot done to make them feel different. In little ways. The wacky characters are so full of personality, the music is upbeat and so amazing. So about what you'd expect from the series. Not the most groundbreaking entry in the series, but still offering some fresh ideas. It's totally worth playing and I'm glad the series didn't die with the original studio. And yeah, of course I picked the game that gives me tons of joy over the one full of existential dread and sexualized body horror. December. Closing out the year was a game I was initially very skeptical about, ever since it first got announced. But I was happy to discover that the concept actually paid off and the game was pretty darn good. Indiana Jones and the Great Circle might be the best Indiana Jones game since the overwhelmingly well-regarded graphic adventure game Fate of Atlantis, and of course the awesome and ironically German-developed platformer Indiana Jones' Greatest Adventures. The franchise spawned a slew of bad games, but this one isn't among those. Controlling Indy and using his whip to climb and swing around, grab and pull objects and solve the odd puzzle works really well in first person, as does combat, which is more melee focused and about using improvised weapons and the environment to deal with enemies if needed, which is in line with the timeless movie trilogy. Indy does have his revolver, of course, and he can get hold of the enemy's firearms and go in guns blazing, though he can't keep firearms with him. Or any weapons for that matter. That's because this here isn't a pure action game, but takes the adventuring part of Indiana Jones very seriously. You're encouraged to take out enemies silently, somewhat silently, or sneak past them altogether, though there's nothing to stop you from taking them all head on. This game is surprisingly old school all in all, positively so. Missions don't just fail because you got spotted or the alarm got raised. I mean, it might just have failed, seeing that you can quickly get surrounded by enemies if you're not careful, but at least the game gives you a chance to get out of your own mess again. It also has you make your way through sprawling levels where enemies patrol in rather believable yet still gamey ways, where you need to keep an eye out for med packs because there is no other healing, where alert phases can last surprisingly long and are surprisingly quick to reactivate, where you can't detect your enemies through walls and they can still spot you even when you just lean and peek around a corner, and where there aren't really safe spots in the actual levels. So when you use a zip line to glide down or pull yourself over a ledge with your whip, you might stumble into the arms of a guard who immediately raises the alarm. And to be honest, I found this really refreshing. The game isn't super hard and there are still a lot of modern conveniences, but these old school design philosophies made the gameplay feel more organic. But enough about combat and enemy encounters. Most of what you do is looking at stuff, taking pictures, searching every nook and cranny of an area. You know, like an explorer or archaeologist. There are so many puzzles for you to find and to solve that actually require you to turn on your brain and think a bit. Not too hard, again, but a nice change of pace. You don't always just have to look for the code or password. You sometimes have to decipher it yourself. And of course you get a lot of tombs to raid, like some kind of male Lara Croft. As we are used from the movies, Indy once again has to throw down with the Nazis and once more gets opposed by a charismatic Nazi villain, who kinda tries too hard to copy Christoph Waltz.
Jetzt amüsieren Sie mich aber, Oberst. So wie ein Dorftrottel die Leute mit seinen drolligen Marotten amüsiert.
But even more exciting, this time he gets to fight the OG fascists as well, when he infiltrates the Vatican, which turns out to be this massive and detailed open-ended playground for you to explore and find all kinds of collectibles and the odd dungeon of course. But his globe-trotting adventure doesn't stop there. You get to visit Giza, the Himalayas and many more locations around the world, with the especially noteworthy addition of the Peruvian jungle during the tutorial, recreating the opening of the original movie. The game nails the style and feeling of the original trilogy and is just a blast to play, a perfect send-off for the year of 2024. But let's not wrap things up just now. As I said in the beginning, highlighting one game each month is not really fair to all the great releases and doesn't really paint a whole picture of all that has happened in this gaming year. So to celebrate just a few more games, let me present to you the UnicornStorm Golden Gamepad Awards. Yeah, that's a nice title. Best Re-Release. A bunch of really well-made ports or remasters have been released this year. I mean, look at all those re-releases. GOG gave us the definitive version of the first 3 classic Resident Evil games, aside from emulation, I mean, in beautiful high resolution and uncut. But they didn't stop there. Nice, Killing Time, yet another Doom remaster. Epic Mickey got rebrushed, Dead Rising got recut, and Lollipop Chainsaw got repopped. We got 2 Ace Attorney collections this year, so now, aside from one crossover game, we got all the Ace Attorney games conveniently in one place, be it on console or PC. And the same goes for Castlevania as well, more or less. And let's not forget the Evercade, that's still going strong. Little Big Adventure returned after 30 years with streamlined gameplay and voice acting. Clock Tower is now officially playable for Western gamers, and the re-release even added all kinds of goodies. Paper Mario included some nice additions, especially with the enhanced soundtrack, but the Tomb Raider remaster went the extra mile. We're still talking about a remaster. The underlying game is still the same, but they upped the resolution, included enhanced character models, redrew the textures, added models where the original game used sprites. The levels are visually more complex without straying too far from the original intent. It's rather subtle additions, but those go a long way, especially with the improved lighting. At first I didn't notice it, I mean, of course it looks better, but only when I switched to the classic look did I see how much work they put into the game's look, and with that into the atmosphere. It's not just better lighting effects and textures. They altered the geometry of the places you explore, not in a way that affects gameplay, but still in ways that change up how these places feel. Cracks in the walls and holes in the ceiling where you're able to catch a glimpse of the outside have been added. 3D modeled objects instead sprites. It's still the same game, it plays the same, you have the same objectives, the same enemies in the same areas that behave the same. It's just the visuals that got reworked, alongside a few quality of life features, but those go a long way and give the perfect opportunity to return to these video game classics. Best Remake. In addition to these many re-releases and remasters, there have also been quite a few full-blown remakes. With the remake of Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons kind of in the middle between the two categories, with it being really close to the original, though just the inclusion of actual co-op changes the experience substantially. But when it comes to the true remakes or reimaginings that offer a completely new experience, I actually had to think quite hard about which game to choose. I guess the obvious choice for many would be Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, but not for me. Same as with its prequel, it kinda misses the point of the original story and changes too many things that didn't need changing, for the worse. It's an incredible game, but I hate what it does to FF7's story. And my feelings are similar on the Alone in the Dark remake. I was really looking forward to it, and I mean, I had a good time with it. There are a lot of great things in this game, but overall, I was a bit disappointed. The mansion itself quickly became one of my favorite video game locations, and the atmosphere in this game is top-notch, but the exploration felt too restrictive, and there was way too much jank for a premium-priced game, and the story felt pretentious as hell. There was another game though, where you explored a mansion, had to solve puzzles and deal with the supernatural. The Another Code Recollection collection brought the DS and Wii game to the Switch and implemented quite a few changes to the overall design, to make the games work on the Switch's environment and also have a more consistent style between the two games. Many of the puzzles had to be changed, and instead of a top-down or side-scrolling perspective, you can now explore the different environments with full 3-dimensional movement. With that, already the game offers a completely new experience, but the added and changed puzzles and some additions and alterations to the story make it even more of a new experience. While I don't think every change is for the better, especially with the more animate-up presentation compared to Dual Destiny's somber graphic novel style approach, it's still worth experiencing as a different take on the story. But, well, I'm not really satisfied with my choice. There's actually another game as good of a remake, but for different reasons. The Silent Hill 2 remake presents the town of Silent Hill and also the horrifying Otherworld in a new light. The serene and calm atmosphere of the town really shines, and the dark and scary nightmare realm really is menacing and deliciously disgusting in all the right ways. There is more to explore in the town, and many of the main sections got extended. Near the end it drags a bit, but for most of its runtime the game really captivated me, with its tense enemy encounters, with all the labyrinthian places you have to explore, but mostly because of its sublime atmosphere. This could have been a walking simulator, and to be fair, it is during many sections, but the world itself is so compelling that I just want to dive into it, take a closer look at everything and just enjoy my stay in Silent Hill, monsters and all. So you know, I guess I'm giving this award to both games. Yeah, that's fair. Both games do enough to warrant that, each in its own way, so they can share the honor of being my favorite remake or reimagining this year. Best VR game. 2024 was a great year for VR gaming. My biggest highlight was the official release of the PSVR software on Steam, giving me access to the whole library of PC VR games. Not free of all issues, but still a big step towards making VR more feasible as a mainstream gaming experience. As for my favorite VR game this year? Well, a few games have been released. Happy Funland, while not the most polished experience, let me explore a haunted amusement park. So that was great. And there have been some VR versions of already existing games I was looking forward to, like Bulletstorm or the incredible Metal Hellsinger. Hey, shooting demons to the beat of metal songs is even better in VR, though a few options for button mapping and the like would be highly appreciated. And while I enjoyed my time with especially some of the VR conversions, there was also a completely original VR game that gave me the grandest experience yet on this platform. Skydance's Behemoth is an epic adventure, a melee-focused fantasy RPG where you have to infiltrate enemy encampments and old ruins, battle hordes of foes and their mighty leaders, all to make your way towards gigantic beasts you have to fell in a fashion rather similar to Shadow of the Colossus. You get access to a good number of melee weapons, all with slightly different advantages, but also unique weapons that handle very differently to the others. You can change the grip on many weapons or two-hand them, go for dual wield or sword and board, use throwing weapons or projectiles, or rely on good old bare-knuckle fighting. You even get a fancy grappling hook that's helpful both during exploration and combat. Fighting human enemies is a test of your reflexes and tactics, while the behemoths are more so puzzles you have to figure out. While not perfect and still filled with the usual VR hiccups, this game is incredibly immersive. The combat feels great and gives you so many options to tackle any of the challenges. We haven't had any need for proof that VR games are more than just tech demos and minigames for quite a while now, but this game is certainly a great showcase of what you can do in a game fully made for VR. Best Anime Game. So I like me some anime bullshit every now and then, and this year once again had a few releases that fit the bill. Unicorn Overlord had this old school anime feeling with a good amount of lightheartedness in a surprisingly mature and serious story despite the colorful designs, while Visions of Mana embraces the modern anime scene, full of childish tropes, artificial suspense and clumsy humor, and I can appreciate that at times. But I'm kinda growing tired of this approach that seems to be most of what we are getting nowadays. So I was pleasantly surprised by Metaphor Refantasio. It's kinda in between the old school style and the modern thing, and generally pretty well written, if a bit on the nose with some of its themes. I mean, we came to expect that from Atlus and the people behind the Persona games. But this game got something Persona doesn't have. Lots of blood and explicit death and murder. This game is very much dark or mature fantasy Persona, but instead of a high school simulator, we have a whole kingdom-spanning Lord of the Rings-like journey. We're not just hanging out with our buddies or making new friends, we're gaining the people's trust, because the safety of the whole kingdom and the unstable peace are at stake this time. But many of the iconic elements are still here. Calendar managements, pacts and friendships that power up your abilities, collectible transformations with access to different abilities, the ultra stylish presentation and the amazing music, albeit in a different style to fit the medieval fantasy setting. The combat is broadly what you'd expect, but even here they changed up a few things. Every one of those series have their own spin on the concept of exploiting enemy weaknesses. In this game, it all revolves around an action point system that offers a bit more strategy with the turn order, and successfully exploiting a weak point reduces the amount of action points used, letting you attack more often during your turn. Also, instead of just initiating a preemptive attack by hitting monsters on the field, you can now wail on them to drain their HP and even defeat weaker ones without entering battle, so that's pretty neat. So yeah, another great work from some of the key members behind the Persona games, with a fresh new setting that ironically draws from the role-playing genre's well-established roots. Best Open World. There have been a few major open world games this year. I'm sure there have been quite a lot of open world survival games that mostly flew under the radar, or are in early access or something like that, but I'm not talking about them. I'm also not talking about The Crew Motorfest, because Ubisoft killed the original The Crew more or less simultaneously with the release of Motorfest, so they don't deserve to be rewarded. In all fairness though, the virtual racing sandbox of Hawaii is pretty amazing, but while it's fun to drive around the open world, the missions aren't really seamlessly integrated into the game world, so it's a bit of a waste. Final Fantasy Rebirth also went all out with its open world, in a stark contrast to its predecessor's deceptively sprawling hallway levels. And while this new interpretation of Gaia is quite nice to look at and gives the exploration some kind of nostalgic glee, again, there isn't really that much done with the game world. The more deliberate locations and levels shine bright in this new style, but the open world itself doesn't really offer that much after the initial awe of seeing all those simplified landmarks and implied details of the original game as actual, meticulously designed places. maybe the first part was on the right track after all. Dragon's Dogma features once again a beautifully detailed open world that's just a pain to traverse, deliberately so. And Visions of Mana features a just beautiful game world that has gameplay-wise nearly zero depth. I almost named Fallout London my favorite open world game because I really enjoyed exploring this post-apocalyptic fictional version of London, visiting familiar places, exploring the dangerous repurposed ruins, and yeah, this game is a very close second, because while this is an amazing playground with lots and lots of exploration, it so deliberately leads you through the world and has natural roadblocks all over the place, which certainly make it a better game, but those stop it for me from making it the open world game this year. That honor goes to Rise of the Ronin. Okay, look, I'm incredibly biased in favor of this game, for the same reason I'm so enthralled with Ghost of Tsushima. Though, I think the latter one is a lot more immersive and overall a better game than the former. But letting me explore an open game world set in Japan, especially if it is competently made, well, it just resonates with me. How the game plays and what kind of story is told and all that is still important, but exploring Japan is an immediate plus for any game. And this game here even let me visit locations I got to actually see when I was there, some landmarks that are still there. The game is set around the Meiji Restoration, so we get to appreciate Edo period buildings and clothing styles that mingle with the encroaching Western influences you'll mostly notice in the port town of Yokohama. You can outright wear a suit and bowler hat or go for the Western-inspired yet still very Japanese look. You get to explore little hamlets and bustling towns that might embrace modernity or fully commit to tradition, and you get to enjoy the beauty of the vast wilderness where you come across the odd shrine and temple neatly nestled into nature itself. You can stroll through a bamboo grove or use your ninja tools and climb all kinds of buildings to get a better view of the beautiful surroundings. It's a beautifully detailed game world worth exploring for anyone with just the tiniest bit of interest in the country of Japan. Best horror. I played a few horror games this year. It's a genre very dear to me, so I'm always looking forward to a good horror game. Not even really for the scares, though those certainly are an important part of it. I mean, well duh. But more so for the mechanics. A fast-paced shooter with scary enemies jump-scaring you all the time doesn't interest me as much as more methodic games that require you to slow down and find creative solutions while being scared. That's why survival horror is one of my favorite genres. And there have been a few horror experiences this year. Some were fine enough gameplay-wise, but lacked the horror atmosphere, like Crow Country or Still Wakes the Deep. Some others were quite disappointing. Alone in the Dark didn't give me what I craved, and while everyone was praising Hollow Body, I just didn't see it. I couldn't get into it. But Silent Hill 2 really drew me in and kept me feeling afraid and uneasy all the way through. The cramped and winding hallways in the more and more deteriorating nightmare world, filled with gruesome enemies that kept surprising me when they hid in corners or below counters and tables, who filled me with dread when I heard their distorted growling and shrieking. They're always lurking in the shadows, and your flashlight is often not enough to illuminate the darkness. The suspense never seemed to let off. There were of course moments of respite, but the game draws out the horror, leaves you with the anticipation of release but never gives it to you. And it's surprisingly light on jump scares. Pretty much all the scares happen naturally, and even the few that are scripted or happen in a cutscene don't resort to cheap tactics like loud, non-diegetic sounds and the like. Despite the somewhat janky gameplay, the atmosphere that Bloober Team crafted with this game is top-notch and never lets off. The game is suspenseful from start to finish and one of the most terrifying games I ever played, because it never offered relief, because I never felt safe once I stepped into the other world. And before we move on to the final award, let me quickly elaborate on the selection of categories. While they might appear a bit arbitrary, I did put some thought into them. I chose them based on observations of certain trends or similarities between the games that interested me this year. These might relate to genre, style or setting, or frankly any other factor that's interesting enough to me. I won't talk about my favorite sports game or something because generally those don't interest me. I'm also not gonna declare one game the best of the year. I did so in the past, but to be honest, I don't see much sense in that. I already showed you my favorites from each month, but how would I weigh up which one of those deserve to be the best of all? Is it the longest? The one with the highest production value? The one with the least amount of bugs? I enjoy different games for different reasons, and choosing only one of all those great releases? Well, it doesn't seem sensible to me. So instead, for my last award, I'm picking the game that was the most fun to me this year. And while this might be a bit unfair, because the more story focused and the more mechanically demanding a game becomes, the more the focus shifts away from pure simple fun towards other things. Mastery of systems, exploration of themes. But I think talking about the amount of fun I got from a game has more value than arbitrarily weighing up different elements of different games and somehow coming to a conclusive result at the end. No, this year is about pure, plain enjoyment. And this year again gave us quite a few of that sort. Be it Square Enix's Splatoon-like team shooter Foam Stars, or the highly addictive Balatro. Nintendo showed what they are all about with Princess Peach Showtime, a worthy successor to her, let's call it divisive outing on the Nintendo DS. I liked it, and in her new game she has to face her sinister opponents in all kinds of unique and creative ways. Duel them as an elegant sword fighter in a fairy tale setting, sneak around them and attack from the shadows as a deadly ninja, command the inhabitants of the deep sea as a mermaid, or bake for them. Yeah, the game is silly and quirky, and that's what makes it so much fun. But the game that truly gave me the most joy this year, that just had me smiling constantly, that became synonymous with fun for me, was Astrobot. Damn, this whole game is just so adorable. I mean, look at Astro, look at all the other little robots and critters. There is so much joy in, well, everything. Every level is just so upbeat, even the spooky, scary ones. And the music, it's something else. It's catchy, it's energizing, it's something you can listen to at the gym. The perfect workout music. There's so many fun and creative things to discover, be it silly yet nifty one-off mechanics, things reacting to some of your actions, or just stuff happening in the background. And of course, the many nods to legacy IPs, that while not entirely exclusive to PlayStation consoles, are at least closely associated with the PlayStation. You can be cynical and just see it as nostalgia bait, and I guess there is at least some truth to it, but more than that, it's a celebration of PlayStation's history. Even without all the references, the game would still be incredibly fun to play. But for a game featuring somewhat of a PlayStation mascot, it's only fair to include all kinds of things from the console's past. There is some key jangling involved, certainly, but more so, it's a commemoration of the great gaming moments of the past, made by people who fondly remember their own first experiences with this medium and try to recreate those for a new audience. All packed into an amazing and incredibly fun game. And that's why Astrobot deserves to be held in such high regard. And with this well-deserved final award as a send-off, I'm bidding you farewell as well. I hope you enjoyed this look back at the year of 2024 with all its great gaming releases, and I hope you had a good year yourself as well. I wish you all the luck and all the best for the next year. May all your aspirations come true. And of course, I hope to see you again on the next game. This has been Rady, and I wish all of you a happy new year.